I want you to think, have you ever had a time in your life where maybe you did something over and over again, you've done it a bunch of times, and then all of a sudden, you couldn't do it anymore, or you forgot how to do it? For me, this takes me back to not one of my best memories in middle school growing up. I grew up in a pretty musical family, and so I took piano lessons and all that, and we would have these recitals and in this like big hall with all these people, and so I remember this one recital vividly where I had prepared so much. I knew this song forward and backwards, this piece. It was just, I could play without even thinking. And we get to the recital, and it gets to my turn. I go up, and I'm playing, and it's going great. And then I get to the last part of the song, and I just completely blank, totally freeze. And I do what most people would do in that moment, as you have a group of people staring at you, just totally freezing up. I start panicking. I start sweating. So if you ever notice me start sweating up here, it means I have no idea what's coming next. So just watch for that. But I start freaking out, and I remember I think I just like mashed a few random chords, abruptly ended it, and then I turn, and of course the first thing I make eye contact with is my dad with the big video camera right at me. In the back of my mind, I'm just like, no, cut it, delete it. He kept it, of course. But I remember the walk of shame back to my seat. I sit down, and I'm just thinking, what happened? I knew how to play it. I played it so many times, and all of a sudden, I couldn't do it. And in some ways, this is how I picture the disciples today in our reading from Matthew chapter 17, as they are presented with a situation to perform this miracle as healing for this boy, and they can't do it. So this morning, we're looking at, in this series, right, theology of glory versus the theology of cross, and today we're going to be looking at it through this lens of miracles, but specifically through this lens of what role does faith play in miracles. And so we're going to dive just right into this because there's a lot to get to. So beginning in verse 14 from Matthew chapter 17, it starts off and it says, "At the foot of the mountain, a large crowd was waiting for them. A man came and knelt before Jesus and said, 'Lord, have mercy on my son. He has seizures and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him.'" Now, Jesus has just come down from the Transfiguration. We talked about this about a month or so ago. Transfiguration, this glorious encounter where Moses and Elijah are with him, and Peter, James, and John are witnessing Jesus' full glory on display. And so it's this incredible moment, and then Jesus comes down from the mountain, is with all the disciples again, and he's presented with this situation where the disciples, they are unable to heal this boy. And we might hear this and think, well, of course not. Of course they couldn't heal. They're not Jesus. But if you rewind a little bit back to Matthew chapter 10, we hear Jesus after he brings his disciples together and he gives them this calling and he says to them, "Go and announce to them that the kingdom of heaven is near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cure those with leprosy, cast out demons." Jesus specifically gives the disciples this calling to go do these things. And so if you're in the disciples' position, you have this chaotic, horrible situation happening of this son who's being attacked by a demon. He's having seizures. He's causing him to try to throw his body into fire, into water, to really take his own life. And the disciples have to be thinking, surely this is the kind of situation Jesus has given us this power to go do. Surely we would be able to bring this healing here. And yet, in the moment where it seems like they needed Jesus' power the most, they couldn't do it. It didn't work. And we get a little bit of the disciples' reaction to this, some of the shock that they have, surely some humiliation maybe as well, as after all of this, they pull Jesus aside and they say to him, "Why couldn't we cast out that demon? Why couldn't we do it?" And Jesus, he responds to them in this short phrase that is challenging And it's one that a theology of glory is going to want to just latch onto and run with. And so it's one we have to kind of work with and tease out and kind of peel back the layers. Jesus says to them, you don't have enough faith. What a tough thing to hear from Jesus. And I don't know if you ever have these moments where you read something, Jesus says in the scriptures, and you get a little uncomfortable and you almost think, did Jesus just actually say that? and this is one of those moments for me, and I think this is a really challenging one for us to kind of hear. And it's oftentimes because we enter into these things that Jesus says and we have certain assumptions are at play about what he's saying here, right? We hear, you don't have enough faith. And where our mind goes with that is we view it from a quantitative perspective, right? Like Jesus is saying, hey guys, your faith, it's right here, and we're going to need it to be up here for the miracles to work. We just need more of it. But this starts to make less sense thinking about it that way when you see what Jesus says immediately after this. Right after Jesus says, you don't have enough faith, he then says to them, I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. So if the problem for the disciples was the quantity of their faith in Jesus, why would he then point to a mustard seed, this tiny seed, and say, if you have faith like that, you could do anything. Nothing is impossible. I mean, look at a mustard seed here. Mustard seed, Jesus, whenever he's talking, Jesus is very intentional about the words that he uses. He never is using words loosely. And so Jesus didn't say if you have faith like an acorn or faith even like a seed of wheat. Jesus specifically chooses this tiny seed, a mustard seed, one of the smallest seeds there are. And he says, faith like that can do anything. And so what we quickly realize is Jesus isn't talking about the quantity of your faith, but he's talking about the quality of your faith. Not that the problem is you aren't trusting in him enough, but actually maybe even a worse issue, you are placing your trust in something else. And this is what we see happening here with the disciples. Jesus, he's focused on the object of your faith. And the point that he's making is that the strength of your faith is not found in something you are doing, but it's found in the very thing in which you put your faith. Now, I don't know if any of you know of Nick Wallenda. I don't know if it's for a living or just for fun, but he professionally walks across tight ropes across very high places. And I don't know, does anyone even know what the name of that is? I looked it up and I'd never even heard of this word before. Apparently it's a funambulist, never even heard of that word before. That's the official name. But back in 2013, Nick did the unthinkable. He walked across a tightrope completely unharnessed all the way across the Grand Canyon. And you can see a shot of him as he's doing this, which my favorite part of it is I like how he doesn't have like some special uniform. He's just like casually in like jeans and a t-shirt. It's like he just got done doing some yard work and now he's, walking across the Grand Canyon. But he does this incredible feat of walking across, and they interviewed him once he got across, and he said, I just have to say, Lord, thank you for calming that cable, because apparently when he was in the middle, the wind started picking up and it started shaking like crazy. So he does this incredible feat. But now imagine for a moment that Nick goes to do this, and instead of that cable, he's got a long string of dental floss. Right? Long string of dental floss. Is that going to hold up? But wait. What if he puts all of his trust in it? Man, what if he puts all of his faith in? What if he fervently has all this passion for his trust in that? He starts publicly declaring how much trust he has in that dental floss. Is that dental floss going to hold? No. The strength of his faith, he could have all the faith in the world in that dental floss, but the strength is found in the thing in which you are putting your trust. And that's what Jesus is showing here to the disciples, is that he comes down from this mountain, and their problem isn't that they weren't trusting Jesus enough. It's a worse problem. They in some way were putting their trust in something other than him. And the Bible doesn't flesh out exactly what that is, although it's a little bit of speculation. You could think, they've given them these abilities to do incredible things. And what do we naturally do as human beings when we've been given these gifts from God, these talents, is, we start to latch onto them. And we start to build ourselves up with them. It's so easy to do that. And what happens here is when you put your faith in something else, you've got an idol. And as we see this starts to make more sense why Jesus reacted the way he did when he came down from that mountain. Because notice, Jesus comes down and he doesn't say to the disciples, "Come on, guys. Did you forget how to do this? We just talked about this. Okay, here we go. Come together. This is how we do healings again." No, notice Jesus' reaction. He says to them, "You faithless and corrupt people. How long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me." Jesus is deeply disturbed by what he sees. And that's because he comes down from this mountain. He's not just witnessing people who are trying to trust in him, but they're just not trusting enough. He's witnessing unbelief, faith placed in something else. In this account, it's actually eerily similar to what happens with Moses in Exodus, right? Moses is on Mount Sinai. He has this glorious encounter with the Lord, receives the 10 Commandments, and then as he comes down the mountain, what does he find? The people are worshiping a golden calf. They take all this gold and they fashion this golden calf and they're worshiping it. And that sounds crazy to us, right? Like, what's a big animal made out of gold? You're worshiping that? But here's the interesting detail in there. They took the name of the Lord and they attached it to the golden calf. And so in a sense, they were still thinking they were worshiping the true God. And yet from Moses' perspective, they have totally placed their faith in something else. They thought they had been abandoned, and so now they're placing their faith in this other thing. And this is what Satan does through a theology of glory, especially when it comes to miracles and faith and the dynamic at play there is Satan, he starts with truth. He doesn't just come at us with some totally thing that's totally opposite of what God says, but he starts with truth. He says, God has the power to do miracles. In fact, he can give you that miracle, but then what he does is he makes the shift and says, well, if you don't have that yet, you must just not have enough faith. You need to trust more. And what this does is then it starts to bleed out into your whole faith life where, maybe you're going to church, you're serving more, you're praying more, you're in the scriptures, you're doing all these things that maybe from an outside perspective, everyone thinks that's someone who's thriving in their faith, and yet inside you have fashioned a golden calf of religious moralism. Religious moralism, this is when you take the acts of following Jesus and you worship those instead of Jesus himself. It's when you take the things that we do here, things in your faith life, and you look to those to justify yourself before God, to get things from him rather than trusting in him and him alone. And that faith in that, it's like dental floss across the Grand Canyon. It can't hold. It's going to let you down. And this can be a challenging thing to hear because many Christians build their life around what they are doing for God. It's such an easy move to make because that's how the rest of our world works, right? It's what you do for people. And so we so easily slip into that. And when we do that, we are putting our faith in a false idol. And we're called to turn away from that. But turn away from that to the true God. And this is where there is incredible hope in this passage. Is Jesus then says, I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. I grew up in Colorado. I can tell you firsthand, mountains don't just move. They don't just start moving, and that's the point. When you put your faith in Jesus Christ, suddenly nothing is impossible. No struggle is too big. No chain can't be broken. No sickness, no illness, not even death itself is greater than his power. The security found with faith placed in him. And here's the important thing to realize is this power, it's not something we get to start going and doing miracles as we see. But instead, as theologians of the cross, we look to the cross as the place where the greatest miracle happened. Where the weakness of God, his great weakness, he brings his greatest power. And that actually at the cross, he begins the great reversal. The great reversal where now we are dead set on a path where there's no pain, there's no more sickness, there's no more death. That is secure. That is the most secure promise we have. And the thing we have to realize is miracles do happen in this life. God absolutely works through in mysterious and incredible ways. But any miracle that might happen in our life, and we do cry out, Lord, let us experience that. But anything that we experience in this life that's a miracle is a mere breaking through of the full reality every single one of us is headed towards. We have the greatest of miracles already ours. In the here and now. And any prayers, Lord, let me just experience a taste of that in the present, but we know it's coming. And we put our faith and hope in that reality. We turn from putting our faith in these things that try to justify ourselves and to get these momentary miracles from God, but we turn our eyes to the ultimate miracle, the restoration he's bringing. Not just a miracle, but a full and complete resurrection where all things are made right. And we turn to that. And just to close here, N.T. Wright in his commentary on this section, he talks about how if this faith and where we place it, and I'm just going to read this here. He says, the secret, of course, is that the size of the faith isn't important. What's important is the God in whom you believe. If you want to see the moon, the size of the window you're looking through isn't important. What matters is that it's facing in the right direction. A tiny slit in the wall will do if the moon is that side of the house. Where it's a huge window facing in the wrong direction will be no good at all. That's what true faith is like. The smallest prayer to the one true God will produce great things, whereas the most elaborate devotion to a God of your own making, or indeed someone else's, will be useless. That's the calling today, to examine ourselves. Where have we been placing our faith? And place it in the God of miracles, the God who is working the greatest of miracles among us, and approaching him with an open arm and say, Lord, I will receive all that you have to give me. Whether that's the miracle here in the now, and yet recognizing anything now is merely a breaking through of that reality we are all headed towards. Let us pray. Gracious God, so often miracles are something that we maybe almost think are like magic, or it's this power that we claim, but Lord, all power and glory is yours. You are the great miracle worker. You didn't just heal people for the sake of the moment, but you were giving a glimpse of the reality we are headed towards. And so, Lord, I pray that even now, as we do pray for miraculous things to happen, as you continue to do, that we would never lose sight of that hope, that we would place our faith in that hope, not in a false God, but in the true God and how he works among us. God, you are good and gracious. Let us trust in you more and more. In your name we pray. Amen.